James Whitaker, a 42-year-old white American real estate magnate, strode through the glass doors of Éclat, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, with the confidence of a man who owned half the city's skyline. His tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and polished leather shoes spoke of wealth, but his easy charm, a smile that disarmed and eyes that calculated, marked him as a titan among the elite. At 6 feet tall, with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair and a jawline softened only slightly by age, James moved through the world as if it had been built for him. In many ways, it had. "Good evening, Mr. Whitaker," the maitre d', a wiry man named Paul, greeted him with a practiced nod. "Your usual table?" "Yes, Paul," James replied, his voice smooth but distracted as he glanced at his phone. "And have a bottle of the 85 Cabernet ready. My guest will join me shortly." "Of course, sir," Paul said, gesturing toward a secluded corner table overlooking the city's twinkling lights. Éclat's dining room buzzed with the quiet hum of power, senators murmuring over steak tartare, tech moguls sealing deals over artisanal cocktails, and socialites laughing just loudly enough to be noticed. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over linen tablecloths, and the air carried the faint scent of truffle oil and ambition. This was James's domain, a world where appearances were currency and success was measured in square footage and stock options. He settled into his chair, adjusting his cufflinks, a subtle habit from years of boardroom battles. His phone buzzed with a text from Lauren Hayes, his girlfriend of 6 months. "Running late, darling. Board meeting. Be there in 20. James smiled faintly. Lauren's tardiness was predictable, almost endearing, like her calculated charm and relentless drive. As CEO of a boutique PR firm, she thrived in the same high-stakes world he did, navigating it with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Her blonde hair, always perfectly styled, and her designer dresses, always a step ahead of the season, made her the ideal partner for a man of his stature. Together, they were a power couple, photographed at galas, quoted in Forbes, and envied by those who mistook wealth for fulfillment. Yet, as James sipped his water, waiting for the wine and Lauren, a flicker of unease stirred beneath his polished exterior. Éclat was more than a restaurant. It was a stage, and he played his role flawlessly. But tonight, the script felt heavy. His mind drifted, unbidden, to Amara Johnson, his ex-wife. A Black American woman whose warmth and authenticity had once anchored him. Amara was a chapter he'd closed a year ago, after 8 years of marriage ended in a bitter divorce. Her laughter, her habit of humming jazz while cooking, her fierce independence, they belonged to a life he'd traded for this one. He hadn't thought of her in months, or so he told himself. Why now? He pushed the thought away, focusing on the cityscape beyond the window. Chicago's towers, many bearing his name, glittered like trophies. At 42, James had everything he'd been taught to want: a penthouse in the Gold Coast, a private jet, and a network of connections that opened any door. His company, Whitaker Properties, had just closed a $200 million deal to develop a new commercial district, cementing his legacy. Yet the thrill of victory felt fleeting, like a meal that looked exquisite but left you hungry. "Mr. Whitaker, your wine," a server said, presenting the Cabernet with a flourish. James nodded, barely listening as the server described its vintage. His phone buzzed again, another text from Lauren. "Almost there. You'll love my new dress." He replied with a quick, "Can't wait," but his attention wandered to the dining room. The elite mingled seamlessly, their conversations a tapestry of mergers, investments, and discreet boasts. This was the life he'd chosen, the one his upbringing in a wealthy, white suburban family had groomed him for. His father, a banker, had taught him that success meant dominating the room. His mother, a socialite, had taught him that image was everything. Amara, with her middle-class roots and unpolished honesty, had never fit their vision, or ultimately his. The memory of their divorce stung unexpectedly. He'd walked away, convinced she couldn't keep up with his world. She'd fought for them, her dark eyes pleading, but he'd been too consumed by ambition, too seduced by the promise of a life that looked perfect on paper. Now, Lauren fits that life. She understood the game and played it better than most. So why did James feel like he was still searching for something? Paul returned, escorting Lauren to the table. She glided through the room, turning heads in a form-fitting emerald dress that screamed money and taste. At 35, Lauren was a vision of ambition, her blue eyes sharp and her smile a weapon. "Sorry I'm late, darling," she said, air-kissing James's cheek to preserve her lipstick. "The board was a nightmare, but we secured the Thompson account. Worth it." "You look stunning," James said, pouring her wine. "Tell me about it." Lauren launched into a recap, her voice animated but controlled. Thompson's CEO was skeptical, but I convinced him our campaign would double their visibility. "We're celebrating tonight." She raised her glass, and James clinked his against it, forcing a smile. Her world, his world, was one of calculated moves and flawless execution. But as she spoke, his gaze drifted to a server clearing a nearby table. Something about her movement, graceful despite the heavy tray, felt familiar. His chest tightened, but he dismissed it. "Just nerves. Just the wine." "James, are you listening?" Lauren's tone sharpened, her eyes narrowing. "Of course," he lied, refocusing. "Thompson's lucky to have you." She smiled, satisfied, and continued. But the unease lingered, a whisper of a life he'd buried. Amara's face flashed in his mind, her radiant skin, her defiant spirit. He hadn't seen her since the divorce and hadn't wanted to. Their mutual friends, mostly his allies now, said she'd moved across town, living quietly. He'd ensured a fair settlement, enough for comfort, or so he thought. Guilt pricked at him, but he drowned it in another sip of Cabernet. That chapter was closed. This was his life now. Éclat, Lauren, power. Yet, as the restaurant's glow enveloped him, James couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was about to change everything. James Whitaker sat at his corner table in Éclat, the city's lights glittering beyond the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. The 85 Cabernet sat untouched before him, its deep red catching the chandelier's glow. Lauren Hayes, radiant in her emerald dress, sipped her wine and leaned forward, her voice sharp with excitement. "The Thompson merger's a done deal, James. Their CEO caved on our terms, full control of the marketing budget. We should celebrate." Her smile was all polish, her blue eyes scanning his face for the expected enthusiasm. James nodded, forcing a grin. "That's huge, Lauren. You're unstoppable." But his attention was snagged on a figure across the dining room. A waitress, her black uniform stretched tight over a rounded belly, moved with careful grace between tables, balancing a tray of crystal glasses. Something in the way she tilted her head, the deliberate poise of her steps, tugged at a memory James had buried. His pulse quickened. He squinted, trying to make sense of the familiarity. When she turned, and the world stopped. Amara Johnson, his ex-wife. Her dark eyes, once so full of warmth when they'd met his, now carried shadows of fatigue. Her long hair, which she used to wear loose and flowing, was pulled into a practical ponytail. But it was her pregnancy, 7 months along, by the look of her, that hit him like a physical blow. 7 months. His mind raced, calculating. Their divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, after a final fight that still echoed in his nightmares. 7 months ago, they'd still been untangling their lives, signing papers, dividing assets. Could the baby be his? James? Lauren's voice cut through, sharp and impatient. She followed his gaze, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together. What's got you so distracted? He said nothing too quickly, tearing his eyes back to her. Tell me more about Thompson. But the words felt hollow, his focus splintering as he tracked Amara's movements. She hadn't seen him yet, or if she had, she gave no sign. Her face was a mask of professionalism, smiling at a table of suits as she delivered their drinks. But James saw the strain in her posture, the way her free hand briefly pressed against her lower back. She looked tired, worn in a way he didn't recognize from their years together. Lauren continued, oblivious, her voice a steady hum about profit margins and media campaigns. James nodded mechanically, but his thoughts were a storm. Amara, here, waitressing at Eclat? The settlement he'd provided, generous he'd thought, should have kept her comfortable. He'd heard through old friends who'd sided with him after the divorce that she'd moved to a quieter part of Chicago, starting over. So why was she working a grueling job, carrying trays while pregnant? And the baby? God, the baby. The timeline gnawed at him. If it was his, why hadn't she told him? Or had she tried? He remembered the months after their split, how he'd instructed his assistant, Sarah, to screen Amara's calls. He'd been angry, hurt, convinced she was clinging to a life he'd outgrown. Her attempts to reach him had dwindled, and he'd let them fade. Too busy with deals and Lauren's glittering world to care. Now, the possibility that she'd been trying to tell him about a child, his child, made his stomach churn. He gripped his wine glass, the stem cool against his palm, and forced himself to breathe. Amara moved closer, serving a table 2 sections away. James held his breath, half expecting her to look up, to meet his eyes. But she didn't. Her focus stayed on her work, her movements deliberate despite the weight she carried. The contrast was stark. Eclat's opulence, its clientele dripping in wealth, and Amara, a black woman navigating this elite space with quiet dignity. Her pregnancy, a silent rebuke to the life James had chosen. He wondered what her days were like now. Long shifts, aching feet. The judgment of customers who saw only a waitress, not the brilliant marketing strategist she'd been before their marriage unraveled. James, you're not listening, Lauren said, her tone clipped. She set her glass down with a deliberate clink. If you're bored, say so. I'm sorry, he said, meeting her gaze. It's just a long day. Let's get the check. He signaled the server, a young man who wasn't Amara, and relief mixed with disappointment. He wasn't ready to face her, not yet. But as he signed the bill, leaving a tip larger than necessary, he couldn't stop picturing her. The way she'd moved, the curve of her belly, and the exhaustion in her eyes all felt like an accusation. He'd left her to this, to a life of struggle, while he dined on $1,000 wine and planned skyscrapers. Lauren stood, gathering her clutch. The Thompsons want to meet tomorrow. You're coming. It's a big moment for us. Her voice was light, but her eyes searched his, sensing his distance. Yeah, I'll be there, James said, his mind elsewhere. As they walked through Eclat, Lauren chatting about investors, James glanced toward the kitchen doors. Amara emerged, a fresh tray in her hands. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and the air thickened. Her face paled, then flushed, but she looked away, her jaw tight. The tray didn't waver, her professionalism unshaken. But her eyes, those deep, expressive eyes that had once looked at him with love, held pain, pride, and something else. Defiance? Resignation? He couldn't read it. James, let's go, Lauren said, tugging his arm. He followed her into the warm Chicago night, the city's pulse humming around them. But as they stepped into his sleek black car, the image of Amara lingered, Her pregnant silhouette burned into his mind. His carefully constructed life, boardrooms, galas, Lauren's calculated charm, felt like a house of cards. One gust, one truth, and it could all collapse. He didn't know what came next, but couldn't ignore what he'd seen. Not anymore. Amara Johnson leaned against a dented locker in Eclat's cramped break room, the hum of the restaurant muffled by the thin walls. Her feet ached, her lower back throbbed, and the weight of her 7-month pregnant belly pulled at her frame. But she refused to sit. Sitting meant admitting weakness, which wasn't an option. Not here or now. The black uniform clung to her, too tight despite the extra-large size she'd swapped to last month. She rubbed her lower back, wincing as a dull pain flared, then forced a deep breath. 5 more hours on her shift. She could do this. She'd seen James Whitaker at his corner table, his tailored suit and easy smile as polished as ever. He'd been staring, his eyes wide with something like shock, maybe guilt. Amara had kept moving, serving her tables with the same practiced smile she'd perfected over months at Eclat. She wouldn't let him see her falter or give him the satisfaction of knowing how hard it had been since he'd walked out. The memory of their divorce, 8 months ago, still stung. His cold dismissal, his accusation that she didn't belong in his glittering world. She'd fought to save their marriage, but he'd chosen ambition over her. Now, seeing him with Lauren Hayes, all elegance and calculation, confirmed what she'd feared. He'd moved on to someone who fit his life. She hadn't. Amara's hand drifted to her stomach, where her baby kicked softly, reminding her why she kept going. She'd found out she was pregnant a month after their final fight, a discovery that had brought equal parts joy and terror. She'd called James, left voicemails, and emailed, "It's yours. I just thought you should know." But his silence was deafening. His assistant, Sarah, had politely rebuffed her, and eventually, Amara stopped trying. Pride had always been her armor, forged in a childhood of scraping by in Chicago's South Side, where her parents taught her to hold her head high no matter the odds. She'd leaned on that pride when James left, when her world crumbled. Her job at Anderson Advertising had been her pride too. She'd climbed from intern to creative director, her campaigns winning awards for their bold, inclusive vision. But pregnancy changed everything. Morning sickness hit hard, forcing her to miss days, then weeks. Her boss, sympathetic at first, grew curt. "We need reliability, Amara," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. She knew what he wasn't saying. A pregnant black woman was a liability in an industry obsessed with optics. They let her go, citing performance issues despite her stellar work. The severance barely covered 2 months' rent, and James's divorce settlement, while fair, didn't stretch far in a city where costs soared. She'd moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Englewood, where roaches skittered across the counter and the heat flickered. Waitressing at Eclat, a job she'd landed through a friend, was her lifeline, grueling, but it paid the bills. The break room door swung open, and Betty, an older server with kind eyes, poked her head in. "You okay, honey? You look beat." "I'm fine," Amara said, straightening and just catching my breath. Betty frowned, unconvinced. "You're carrying a whole human, Amara. Go easy on yourself." Amara managed a smile. "Gotta keep moving. Rent's due." Betty sighed, but didn't push. The staff at Eclat had become her makeshift family, slipping her extra tips, carrying her heavier trays. They saw her, not just as a waitress, but as a woman fighting to survive. Customers, though, were another story. Some stared at her belly with pity, others with disdain, as if her pregnancy disqualified her from serving their $200 dinners. She'd overheard a woman last week whisper, Shouldn't she be on leave? As if Amara had a choice. The lack of maternity protections and the whispers about her place in this upscale world wore her down. But she kept her chin up. Her baby deserved that much. Her thoughts drifted to James again. Seeing him tonight had ripped open old wounds. During their marriage, she'd loved his drive and quiet moments of kindness, like when he'd surprise her with jazz records or dance with her in their kitchen to Ella Fitzgerald. But his world, built on wealth and status, had suffocated her. His mother, Margaret, had made it clear Amara wasn't the right kind of wife, and her comments about Amara's simple background cut deep. James hadn't always defended her, too caught up in his climb to notice. It shattered her when he'd walked out, blaming her for holding him back. Yet here she was, still standing, still fighting, for herself, for her child. The baby kicked again, harder, and Amara's lips curved. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" she whispered. She'd named the baby Zoe in her mind, after her grandmother, a woman who'd raised 3 kids alone while working 2 jobs. Zoe would know that strength too. Amara wouldn't let her grow up ashamed of where they came from, no matter what James or his world thought. "Amara, table 6 needs you," another server called. She nodded, smoothing her uniform. As she stepped back into the dining room, the clink of crystal and murmur of wealth enveloped her. She scanned the room, half expecting James to be there still, but his table was empty. Relief and disappointment tangled in her chest. He'd seen her condition. Would he care? Did it matter? She'd survived without him for months, piecing together a life from scraps. But as she served a plate of seared scallops, her heart whispered a truth she hated to admit. Part of her still longed for the man he'd been, the one who'd loved her before the world got in the way. James Whitaker couldn't sleep. The city lights filtered through the blinds of his Gold Coast penthouse, casting stripes across the king-sized bed that felt too vast, too empty. He tossed aside the silk sheets, his mind replaying the image of Amara Johnson, pregnant and waitressing at Eclat. Her tired eyes, the curve of her belly, the way she'd avoided his gaze. It haunted him. 7 months pregnant. It has been 7 months since their divorce. The math was a relentless drumbeat, each tick of his bedside clock pulling him deeper into guilt. Had she tried to tell him? Had he been too blind to listen? He rose, pacing the hardwood floor, the city's hum, a faint pulse beyond the windows. His penthouse, a monument to his success, felt sterile tonight, its sleek furniture and abstract art mocking his hollow victory. Amara's face surfaced, not as the weary waitress he'd seen hours ago, but as the woman he'd loved, the one he'd betrayed. A memory clawed its way forward, sharp and vivid, dragging him back to their final fight a year ago in their old brownstone, the one they'd bought together when love still felt invincible. It was a rainy evening, the heirloom clock in their living room chiming 9 as thunder rumbled outside. Amara stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter, her voice trembling with anger and desperation. "You're never here, James," she said, her dark curls falling loose from her bun. "You're always at some gala or boardroom, chasing deals that don't matter. What about us?" Her eyes, usually so warm, blazed with hurt. Still in his suit from a late meeting, James scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "I'm building something, Amara. A legacy. You think I work this hard for fun? I'm doing it for us." "For us?" She'd shot back, stepping closer. "You're doing it for your mother, your name, and people who don't even know you. I don't need skyscrapers, James. I need you." Her words had stung, slicing through his defenses. He'd spent years climbing, proving himself in a world his family had groomed him for, a world of boardrooms and country clubs where Amara, with her unpolished honesty and middle-class roots, had never quite fit. His mother, Margaret, had made that clear. Her subtle jabs about Amara's simplicity, a constant undercurrent. James hadn't always defended her, too caught up in his ambitions to see the damage. That night, he'd snapped. "You don't get it, do you?" he'd said, his voice cold. "This world, the one I'm in now, it demands more. I need someone who can keep up and who fits. You're holding me back." The words had landed like a slap, Amara's face crumpling. She'd tried to speak, her voice breaking. "I thought you loved me for who I am, not what I could be for your image." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but James, fueled by anger and pride, grabbed his coat. He'd said, "I can't do this anymore," storming into the rain. The door's slam had echoed louder than the thunder, and he hadn't looked back. Now, standing in his penthouse, the memory felt like a knife. He'd convinced himself Amara was the problem, that her refusal to adapt to his world justified his exit. But seeing her tonight, pregnant, working through exhaustion in a restaurant that catered to the elite, he'd chased, made his rationale crumble. She wasn't holding him back. He'd abandoned her, choosing status over love. And the baby, God, the baby. If it were his, he'd failed her twice over. Had she reached out? Had he ignored her in his pursuit of power? James sank into a leather chair, his laptop glowing on the desk. His heart pounding, he opened his email, scrolling through months of archived messages. There it was, buried among investor updates and gala invites. An email from Amara, sent 7 months ago. Subject: important. His finger hovered over the mouse, dread pooling in his stomach. He clicked, and her words filled the screen. "James, I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm pregnant. It's yours. You should know. Amara." Simple, direct, like her. He'd never seen it. Too consumed with a merger and his new life with Lauren to check. His assistant, Sarah, had flagged it as personal, and he dismissed it without a glance. He slammed the laptop shut, his breath ragged. Amara had tried to tell him, and he'd shut her out. She'd been alone, facing pregnancy, job loss, a new reality, while he dined at Éclat and planned skyscrapers. The settlement he'd provided, generous by his lawyer's standards, suddenly seemed inadequate, a hollow gesture to ease his conscience. He thought of her at Éclat, serving tables for tips, her pride carrying her through a world that judged her for more than her work. The contrast to his life, private jets, tailored suits, Lauren's calculated charm, was stark, shameful. James stood, resolve hardening. He couldn't undo the past, but he could face it. He grabbed his phone, checking Éclat's hours. They opened for lunch in a few hours. Amara would be there, working another grueling shift. He'd go to her, not with excuses or money, but with the truth. He'd failed her and wanted to make it right. The heirloom clock, stored in a warehouse since their divorce, flashed in his mind, its steady chime a reminder of the life they'd shared. He wouldn't let it stay silent, just as he wouldn't let Amara face this alone. As dawn broke over Chicago, James knew his world was about to change, and for once, he wasn't afraid of the cost. James Whitaker sat at his desk, the morning sun slicing through the penthouse windows, illuminating the sterile order of his office. The city hummed below, but his world had narrowed to the laptop screen glowing with Amara Johnson's unopened email. "James, I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm pregnant. It's yours. You should know. Amara." The words, stark and unadorned, burned into him. 7 months ago, she'd reached out, and he'd ignored her, too consumed by boardrooms and ambition to notice. Now, the weight of that neglect pressed against his chest, each breath a reminder of his failure. He stood, pacing the polished hardwood, his reflection flickering in a framed award for Chicago's Developer of the Year. The accolade felt hollow, a relic of a life that no longer fit. Last night at Eclat, seeing Amara pregnant and waitressing had shattered his carefully constructed reality. She'd been alone, carrying their child, while he dined with Lauren Hayes, chasing deals that now seemed trivial. The memory of their final fight, a year ago, when he'd accused her of holding him back, replayed like a wound reopened. He'd walked out, convinced his world demanded more than she could give. Now, he saw the truth. He'd abandoned her when she needed him most. James grabbed his phone and called Sarah, his assistant. Her efficiency was a lifeline in his chaos. "Sarah, I need all my phone records from 7 months ago. Emails, too. Everything." "Everything, sir?" Sarah's voice held a rare note of surprise. "That's a lot of data." "Everything," he repeated, his tone firm. "And clear my schedule for today. No meetings, no calls." Sarah hesitated. "Even the Thompson lunch with Ms. Hayes? It's critical for—" "Cancel it," James cut in. "I have something more important." He hung up before she could protest, his pulse racing. Lauren would be furious, but for the first time in months, her opinion didn't matter. The Thompson deal, a $50 million venture, could wait. Amara couldn't. Within an hour, Sarah arrived, her tablet loaded with organized files. She said phone logs and emails from February were set on his desk. "Anything specific you're looking for?" James shook his head. "I'll handle it. Take the rest of the day off." Sarah nodded, her curiosity unspoken, and left. Alone, James scrolled through the records, his heart sinking with each entry. 10 calls from Amara over a week, all unanswered, all flagged as personal and dismissed by his standing order to screen her. The last call, marked March 15th, had lasted 6 seconds, likely a voicemail he'd deleted without listening. His hands shook as he opened his email archive. Beyond the single message he'd found last night, there were others, brief, polite attempts to reach him, each ignored. One subject line read, "Please, James." He hadn't even opened it. He clicked it now, his throat tight. "James, I'm scared. The doctor confirmed it's ours. I don't know what to do next. I need you to know. Amara." The words were a punch, her vulnerability laid bare. He'd been in New York then, whining and dining investors, Lauren at his side, while Amara faced a life-changing truth alone. He closed his eyes, picturing her in that cramped Englewood apartment she'd mentioned to friends, surrounded by bills and uncertainty. The settlement he'd provided, $200,000, a sum his lawyer called generous, now seemed like a cruel substitute for support. She'd been a rising star at Anderson Advertising, her creativity outshining his deals, yet he'd let her fall. James checked his watch. Eclat opened for lunch in 2 hours. Amara would be there, working another shift, her pride carrying her through exhaustion. He couldn't erase the past, but had to face her and own his mistakes. He grabbed his coat, the decision settling like a stone. Driving through Chicago's bustling streets, he barely noticed the towers bearing his name. His focus was on Eclat, Amara, and the child that might be his. The restaurant's glass facade loomed as he parked, its elegance starkly contrasting the turmoil inside him. Inside, the lunch crowd was light, the air thick with the scent of fresh herbs and wealth. Paul, the maitre d', greeted him. "Mr. Whitaker, your table?" "No," James said, scanning the room. "I'm here to see Amara Johnson. When does she work?" Paul's smile faltered. "Sir, I can't share employee schedules." James slipped $200 bills across the podium. "Just this once." Paul glanced around, then pocketed the cash. Lunch shifts, Tuesday through Saturday. She's here now. James nodded, spotting her near the bar, carefully setting a table. Her uniform strained against her belly, and her movements were slower than he remembered, but her grace remained. He sat at the bar, ordering a water to buy time. She hadn't seen him yet, and her focus was on a customer's order. He watched, noting how she smiled despite the strain and how her hand brushed her stomach protectively. The world she navigated, serving the elite while pregnant, likely judged for her presence in their space, felt like a mirror to his failures. "Amara," he said softly as she passed, his voice barely audible over the restaurant's hum. She froze, her eyes meeting his for a moment before hardening. "I'm working," she said, her tone clipped. "I saw your email," he said, standing. "The one from 7 months ago. I need to talk." She glanced at the clock, then at her manager watching from afar. "My break's in 3 hours. If you're serious, wait." Her voice was firm, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, or challenge. "I'll wait," James said, settling back at the bar. As Amara returned to her tables, he knew this was his first test. 3 hours was nothing compared to the months he'd left her alone. He'd wait, not just for her break, but for as long as it took to prove he wasn't the man who'd walked away. James Whitaker sat at Eclat's bar, the glass of water before him untouched, its surface rippling slightly from the restaurant's ambient hum. The lunch crowd swelled, their murmurs blending with the clink of silverware and the soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. 3 hours had passed since Amara Johnson, his ex-wife, had agreed to talk during her break, her words sharp. "If you're serious, wait." James checked his watch. 12:47 p.m. Her break was minutes away. He'd waited, ignoring texts from Lauren Hayes about the canceled Thompson lunch, ignoring the world he'd built. His focus was singular for once, Amara and the child she carried. She emerged from the kitchen, her black uniform straining against her pregnant belly, her steps deliberate but fatigued. She didn't look his way, her attention on a clipboard as she spoke to a coworker. James watched, noting the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her hand rested protectively on her stomach. With its crystal chandeliers and linen tablecloths, the dining room felt like a stage where Amara played a role she hadn't chosen, serving the elite while carrying a life that tied her to him. He'd seen her here 2 nights ago, a shock that had unraveled his carefully curated life. Now, he was here to face the truth he'd ignored for months. Amara glanced at the clock, then at her manager, a stern woman watching from the hostess stand. She nodded, signaling her break, and headed toward the break room, her posture rigid. James stood, his heart pounding, and followed. The break room starkly contrasted to Eclat's opulence. Dingy walls, dented lockers, the faint smell of coffee and grease. Amara sat heavily in a plastic chair, rubbing her lower back, her eyes meeting his with a mix of wariness and defiance. "You waited," she said, her voice flat but edged with surprise. James replied, "I said I would," sitting across from her, the small table chained between them. "Amara, I saw your email, the one from 7 months ago. I'm sorry I ignored it. I ignored your calls too. I was caught up." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Caught up? Do you mean building your empire, winning and dining with your new girlfriend?" She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "I called you 10 times, James. I emailed you twice. I was scared, alone, and you couldn't be bothered." James flinched, her words echoing their final fight a year ago, when he'd walked out, blaming her for not fitting his world. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low. I was wrong to shut you out, to leave you to deal with this alone. I didn't know about the baby until last night. Amara's eyes narrowed. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. I lost my job at Anderson because of morning sickness, because they didn't want a pregnant woman slowing down their campaigns. I had to move to a one-bedroom in Englewood where the heat barely works. I've been waitressing here, carrying trays for 12-hour shifts because I had no choice. And you were here, drinking $1,000 wine. Her words cut deeper than he'd expected, each one a mirror to his failures. He'd assumed the divorce settlement, $200,000, a sum he thought generous, would keep her afloat. Now, he saw how naive he'd been, how little he'd understood her reality. I want to help, he said, leaning forward. Money, a better job, a place to live, whatever you need. Amara's jaw tightened. You think money fixes this? I don't want your charity, James. I needed you 7 months ago when I was throwing up every morning, when I lost my career. I needed you 6 months ago when I had to pawn my mother's ring to pay rent. I needed you, not your bank account. Her voice cracked, but she straightened, her pride a shield. You want to help? Prove you're reliable. Prove you're not the man who walked out because I didn't fit your world. James swallowed, her challenge settling like a weight. He remembered their marriage, her laughter filling their brownstone, her fierce creativity, the way she'd challenged his mother's subtle disdain. He'd failed her then, seduced by a life of status and power. Now, she was demanding more than apologies, more than money. She wanted him to be someone he hadn't been in years. I'll prove it, he said, meeting her gaze. I don't know how yet, but I will. Amara studied him, her eyes searching for sincerity. The break room's fluorescent light buzzed, and the distant clatter of dishes filtered through the door. My break's almost over, she said finally, standing with effort, one hand supporting her back. Don't make promises you can't keep. I won't, James said, rising. Can I come back tomorrow? To talk again? She hesitated, her hand on her stomach, where their child stirred. I work lunch shifts all week. If you show up, fine, but don't expect me to make this easy. She turned, heading for the door, her steps steady despite exhaustion. James watched her go, the weight of her words anchoring him. He'd spent years solving problems with money, deals, connections, and status. But Amara's pain, her strength, demanded something deeper. As he left the break room, passing tables of Chicago's elite, he felt their eyes on him, their whispers irrelevant. The city outside buzzed, but his path was clear, back to Eclat, back to Amara, one step at a time. He'd wait as long as it took to earn her trust, to be worthy of the child they shared. The heirloom clock, stored since their divorce, ticked in his memory, a reminder that time could heal, but only if he showed up. James Whitaker sat at his desk, the morning sun glinting off the Chicago skyline, visible through his penthouse window. His phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from Lauren Hayes, his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend, demanding answers about his canceled meetings. Thompson's furious. Where are you? He ignored them, his focus on a new task. Over the past week, he'd quietly arranged for Eclat to create a hostess position for Amara Johnson, his ex-wife, whose 7-month pregnancy had shaken his world. The role, less physically demanding, with better pay, would let her rest without wounding her pride. He'd worked through the restaurant's manager, insisting it looked like a natural promotion. Amara deserved safety for herself and their unborn child. At Eclat, Amara stood at the hostess stand, her black dress replaced by a tailored blazer that accommodated her belly. She greeted guests with a warm smile, but her eyes scanned the room warily, as if expecting James to appear. Their confrontation days ago, when she'd demanded reliability over money, had left him determined to prove himself. He hadn't approached her since, giving her space, but he checked in daily, sitting at the bar to ensure she was okay. Today, he arrived early, ordering a coffee and watching her settle into her new role. She moved with less strain, her posture eased, but her guarded expression remained. The lunch crowd filled Eclat, their chatter a backdrop to the clinking of wine glasses. Amara handled reservations efficiently, her professionalism a shield against the elite patrons who sometimes eyed her belly with curiosity or disdain. James noticed a woman whisper to her companion, "She's too pregnant for this place," and his jaw tightened. He'd seen that judgment in his world. The subtle ways society dismissed women like Amara for daring to exist in spaces not built for them. He wanted to intervene, but Amara's steady smile told him she didn't need saving. She'd been fighting these battles alone. The glass doors swung open, and Lauren strode in, her red designer suit starkly contrasting the muted elegance of Eclat. Her blonde hair was flawless, but her eyes were sharp, her usual poise fraying. She'd heard rumors, gossip from their social circle about James's visits to Eclat, about Amara's pregnancy. Her status as his partner, carefully cultivated for galas and headlines, was unraveling, and she wasn't one to lose gracefully. She marched to the hostess stand, ignoring the line of waiting guests. "Amara," Lauren said, her voice low but venomous. "We need to talk." Amara's smile didn't waver, though her hands tightened on the reservation book. "Do you have a reservation, Ms. Hayes?" "Don't play coy," Lauren snapped, leaning closer. "You're ruining James's reputation. Showing up here, pregnant, playing the struggling mother, it's pathetic. How much do you want to disappear?" "Name your price." Amara's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not for sale. If you don't have a reservation, please leave." Lauren pulled out a checkbook, her manicured nails clicking against it. $1 million. Take it, give up the baby for adoption, and go. You'll never fit in his world. Her words dripped with desperation. Her fear of losing her place beside James laid bare. She'd built her career on connections, on being the perfect match for a man like him, and Amara's presence threatened it all. Guests nearby turned, sensing the tension. Amara's hands trembled, but she kept them steady on the desk. "I haven't made any claims on James or his money. Get out before I call security." James, watching from the bar, stood as Lauren's voice rose. He crossed the room in quick strides, his heart pounding. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his tone cold as he saw the checkbook in Lauren's hand. Lauren turned, her composure cracking. "Solving your problem, darling. She's dragging you down, your deals, your image. The Thompson merger is at risk because of her." "The only problem here is you," James said, stepping between them. "Amara, are you okay?" Amara nodded, but her face was pale, her hand pressed to her stomach. "I'm fine," she said, then swayed slightly. "Just dizzy." James caught her elbow, steadying her. "You need to sit." He turned to a nearby server. "Call an ambulance. Now." To Lauren, he said, "We're done. Get out." Lauren's face hardened. "You're throwing everything away for her? For a baby that might not even be yours?" "Security," James called, his voice unwavering. 2 guards appeared, escorting Lauren out as she clutched her checkbook, her heels clicking furiously. James focused on Amara, guiding her to a chair. "Breathe," he said softly. "I'm here." Amara winced, her hand gripping his. "It's the stress," she whispered. "The baby's moving too much." The ambulance arrived swiftly, its siren cutting through Eclat's polished calm. As paramedics helped Amara onto a stretcher, James stayed close, his mind racing. Lauren's betrayal had endangered Amara and their child, but it had also clarified his choice. He'd spent years chasing a world that valued image over substance. a world Lauren embodied. With Amara's hand in his, he knew where he belonged. The heirloom clock, stored since their divorce, ticked in his memory. A promise to be the man she needed, starting now. The ambulance siren wailed through Chicago's bustling streets, its red lights slicing through the midday haze. Inside, Amara Johnson lay on the stretcher, her hand gripping James Whitaker's, her breaths shallow and uneven. The confrontation with Lauren Hayes at Eclat had left her dizzy, her pregnant belly tight with erratic movements. James sat beside her, his face taut with worry, his usual composure replaced by a raw urgency. The paramedic, a calm woman named Carla, monitored Amara's vitals, her fingers swift on a portable device. "Blood pressure's high," Carla said, glancing at James. "We're almost at Mercy Hospital." Amara winced, her free hand pressed to her stomach. "It's too early," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The baby's not due for 2 months." Her eyes, wide with fear, met James's, searching for reassurance. He squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "You're strong, Amara. You both are. I'm here." The ambulance lurched through traffic, the city's skyscrapers blurring past. James's phone buzzed in his pocket. Likely Sarah, his assistant, or investors furious about his absence from the Thompson merger lunch. He ignored it. The $50 million deal, once the center of his world, felt insignificant now. Lauren's cruel offer to Amara, $1 million to disappear, had crystallized his priorities. He'd chosen Amara and their child over the life he'd built. And this moment, with her hand in his, was his chance to prove it. At Mercy Hospital, the emergency room was a flurry of white coats and beeping monitors. Dr. Lisa Patel, a seasoned OB-GYN, met them at the bay, her expression focused as paramedics wheeled Amara in. "Mrs. Johnson, tell me what's happening," she said, checking a chart while nurses hooked Amara to monitors. "Pain," Amara said, her voice strained. "Dizziness, and the baby is moving too much. It started after stress at work." She didn't mention Lauren, but her glance at James spoke volumes. He felt a pang of guilt. His world had brought this on her. Patel's eyes narrowed as she studied the monitor. "Your blood pressure's dangerously high. Preeclampsia likely. We need to stabilize you immediately." She turned to James. "Are you the father?" "Yes," he said firmly, before Amara could respond. "What do you need?" "Medical history? Insurance details?" Dr. Patel said, already motioning for tests. "But right now, stay with her. Keep her calm." James nodded, pulling a chair close to Amara's bed. The monitors beeped steadily, tracking her and the baby's vitals, each sound a lifeline. Amara's sister, Keisha, burst through the doors, her face a mix of panic and anger. She'd been called by an Eclat co-worker who'd witnessed the scene with Lauren. "What happened?" she demanded, her eyes locking on James. "You caused this, didn't you? Bringing your drama into her life?" "Keisha, please," Amara said weakly, reaching for her sister's hand. "It wasn't him. It was his girlfriend." James's jaw tightened. "Ex-girlfriend. I ended it." "Amara, I'm so sorry." Keisha's glare didn't soften. "You're sorry now? Where were you when she was crying herself to sleep, when she lost her job because of this baby?" Her words echoed Amara's from their confrontation, a reminder of the months he'd ignored her calls. "Enough," Amara said, her voice firm despite her pain. "I need you both here, not fighting." Taking Amara's other hand, Keisha relented, her protectiveness a shield James hadn't earned. Hours passed in a blur of tests and IV drips. Dr. Patel returned, her face grave but hopeful. "The medication's working. Blood pressure's coming down. and the baby's stable for now. But you need complete bed rest, Amara. No work, no stress. Any spike could trigger early labor. Amara's face fell. I live alone. I can't afford a nurse, and my apartment's not… She trailed off, her hand tightening on James's. James said you're coming home with me, his tone leaving no room for argument. My place has an elevator and staff to help, and I'll work from home. You and the baby come first. Keisha scoffed. You think she trusts you after everything? You left her, James. I know, he said, meeting her gaze. But I'm not leaving now. Amara, please, for the baby. Amara looked between them, her eyes weary but resolute. Okay, she said softly, but only for the baby. And I want it in writing. No custody claims, no strings. This doesn't change what happened. James nodded, his heart aching at her caution, but understanding it. I'll have my lawyer draft it. Whatever you need. He turned to Dr. Patel. How soon can she be discharged? Tomorrow, if her vitals hold, the doctor said. But bed rest is non-negotiable. She left to prepare paperwork, leaving the room heavy with silence. Keisha broke it, her voice low. If you hurt her again, James, I'll make sure you regret it. I won't, he said, his eyes on Amara. I swear it. Amara's gaze softened for a moment before she looked away. The clock, she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. The one from our old house. Is it still in storage? James's breath caught. The heirloom clock, a wedding gift, had marked their happiest moments. It's safe, he said. I'll have it brought to the house. You'll hear it again. She nodded, her hand resting on her stomach, where their child stirred. Good, she murmured, her eyes closing as the medications took hold. James stayed by her side, and the monitor's steady beeps were a fragile promise. His phone buzzed again. Sarah, warning of boardroom fallout. But he silenced it. The world could wait. Amara and their baby couldn't. Amara Johnson reclined in a plush armchair in James Whitaker's Gold Coast mansion, her pregnant belly a gentle curve beneath a soft blanket. The living room, once a sterile showcase of modern design, now held touches of warmth. A vase of fresh lilies, a stack of novels on the coffee table, and the heirloom clock, retrieved from storage, ticking steadily in the corner. Its familiar chime, a wedding gift from James's parents, grounded Amara in a space that still felt foreign. Dr. Lisa Patel had ordered complete bed rest after her preeclampsia scare at Eclat, and James had insisted she move in, his staff ensuring her every need was met. Yet, Amara's unease lingered as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. This wasn't her home, and trust in James was fragile. James hovered nearby, setting aside his laptop to bring her a glass of water. Need anything else? He asked, his voice gentle, but edged with the strain of the past week. He'd canceled meetings, ignored calls from investors, and faced whispers about the faltering Thompson deal, all to focus on her and their unborn child. Amara nodded, her hand resting on her stomach. I'm okay, she said, though her eyes betrayed her caution. Keisha, her sister, sat across the room, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on James like a hawk. She'd arrived from her hotel that morning, her protective instincts unyielding since the hospital. The doorbell rang, shattering the quiet. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, answered, and Margaret Whitaker swept into the room, her silver hair immaculate, her designer suit a silent declaration of status. Amara tensed, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Margaret had never approved of her during their marriage, and her subtle barbs about Amara's unrefined background were constantly stinging. Now, her presence felt like an intrusion. James, Margaret said that, ignoring Amara, we need to discuss the board. They're questioning your focus. Not now, Mother, James said, his tone sharp. Amara's on bed rest. This isn't the time. Margaret's eyes flicked to Amara, taking in her belly with a flicker of disdain. I see you've made yourself comfortable, she said, her voice cool. A baby doesn't erase the past, you know. You never fit into our world. Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. I didn't ask to be here, Mrs. Whitaker. I'm here for my child, not your approval. Keisha stood, her eyes blazing. You don't get to talk to her like that. Amara's been through hell while your son was off playing king. She lost her job and her home because of him. And you're worried about your precious board? Margaret's lips pursed, but she didn't back down. The Whitaker name carries weight. James's choices. Abandoning deals, inviting complications, threaten everything we've built. This isn't personal. It's reality. It's personal to me, Amara said, her voice rising despite Dr. Patel's warning to avoid stress. You judged me from the start. My clothes, roots, everything. You made James think I wasn't enough. Her hand moved to her stomach, where the baby kicked, a reminder of why she endured this. The memory of Margaret's comments during their marriage, about her simplistic taste, her lack of polish, still burned. Those words had fueled James's doubts, pushing him to walk away. James stepped between them, his face hard. That's enough, Mother. Amara's my family. So is our child. If you can't accept that, leave. Margaret flinched, unaccustomed to his defiance. You're throwing away your legacy for this? Before James could respond, Amara gasped, her face contorting. James, she whispered, clutching her stomach. The pain's back. Panic seized him. Mrs. Chen, call Dr. Patel. Now. He knelt beside Amara, taking her hand. Breathe, Amara. I'm here. Keisha rushed to her side, glaring at Margaret. This is on you. Your stress caused this. Margaret's composure cracked, her eyes widening. I didn't mean... Out, James said, his voice deadly quiet. Until you can respect my family, you're not welcome here. Mrs. Chen escorted Margaret to the door, her protests fading as Amara's breathing grew labored. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, her medical bag in hand. She checked Amara's vitals, her brow furrowed. Blood pressure's spiking again. We need to get her to the hospital. Stress is triggering this. She glanced at James and Keisha. Keep her calm on the way. James lifted Amara carefully, his heart racing. I've got you, he said, his voice steady despite his fear. Keisha grabbed her purse, her anger at James tempered by concern for her sister. As they moved to the car, Amara's hand tightened in his. Don't let go, she whispered. I won't, he promised, the heirloom clock's chime echoing in his mind as they left. None of Margaret's words, the board's pressure, or the Thompson deal's collapse mattered. Amara and their child were his world now, and he'd fight to keep them safe, no matter the cost. Rain lashed James Whitaker's Gold Coast mansion, the wind howling as a late summer storm engulfed Chicago. Inside, the power flickered, plunging the living room into darkness and silencing the heirloom clock that had marked time since James and Amara's marriage. Amara Johnson sat in her armchair, her hands clutching her stomach, her face pale as contractions gripped her. At 34 weeks, the baby wasn't due for 6 more weeks, but the stress of Margaret Whitaker's visit hours earlier had spiked her blood pressure, triggering early labor. James knelt beside her, his hand steadying hers, while Keisha, Amara's sister, paced nearby, her phone useless with no signal. It's too soon, Amara gasped, her voice tight with pain. The baby can't come now. James said we're getting you to the hospital. his tone firm despite the fear clawing at him. The preeclampsia scare days ago, after Lauren Hayes' confrontation at Eclat, had already put Amara on bed rest. With roads flooding and power lines down, getting to Mercy Hospital seemed impossible. Keisha glared at him, her protectiveness undimmed. This wouldn't have happened if your mother hadn't shown up, throwing her weight around. Not now, Keisha, James said, his focus on Amara. He grabbed his satellite phone, a relic from business emergencies, and dialed Mike, his pilot. Mike, it's James. Amara's in labor. Roads are flooded. Can you get the chopper? Mike's voice crackled through the storm's interference. It isn't good out there, but I owe you. Give me 20 minutes to reach the country club's golf course. It's the only clear landing spot. James had kept Mike on payroll during a tough recovery last year, and now that loyalty was their lifeline. The next 20 minutes were agonizing. Amara's contractions came every 5 minutes, each drawing a sharp breath. James held her hand, his voice steady as he coached her through breathing exercises he'd read about in a pregnancy book. You're doing great, he said, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Keisha hovered, timing the contractions, her anger giving way to focus. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, gathered blankets and a flashlight, her calm efficiency a quiet anchor. Talk to me, Amara whispered between contractions, her eyes pleading for distraction. Our first date. Remember it? James managed a small smile. That French place I dragged you to, thinking it'd impress you. You said you'd rather have pizza, that life was too short for food you couldn't pronounce. The memory warmed him, a glimpse of the Amara who'd loved him before his ambition tore them apart. She laughed faintly, then winced as another contraction hit. She said softly, I knew you were different than before everything got complicated. The distant thump of rotor blades cut through the storm. Mike's voice came over the satellite phone. I'm at the golf course. Hurry. The wind's brutal. Getting Amara to the car was a battle. Rain pounded sideways, soaking them despite Mrs. Chen's umbrellas. James drove his SUV through flooded streets, the high clearance barely managing the deep puddles. Amara sat in the back with Keisha, gripping her sister's hand as contractions tightened to 4 minutes apart. At the country club, the golf course was a dark expanse, the helicopter's lights a beacon in the storm. James carried Amara through the wind, her weight light but her pain heavy. Keisha ran ahead, helping Mike prep the chopper. Halfway across the grass, Amara grabbed James's arm, her voice urgent. If something happens, I need you to know. I forgive you for leaving, for everything, and I love you. I never stopped. Her words stopped him cold, rain streaming down his face. Nothing's going to happen, he said, his voice breaking. I love you too, Amara. I'm not going anywhere. Another contraction hit, her body rigid with pain. Something's wrong, she gasped. Mike appeared with a stretcher, his military medic training kicking in. Blood pressure's spiking, he shouted over the wind, checking her with a portable monitor. We need to move. They loaded Amara into the helicopter, and Keisha climbed in beside her. James held her hand as Mike pushed the chopper to its limits, battling turbulence to reach Mercy Hospital's helipad. At the hospital, Dr. Lisa Patel met them in the emergency room, her face grim. The baby's in distress, she said, checking monitors. We need an emergency C-section. Now. Nurses wheeled Amara toward the operating room, her hand slipping from James's. The clock, she whispered, her voice weak. Keep it ticking. I promise, James said, his throat tight. You'll both hear it again. The doors closed, and he stood frozen, the storm outside raging as fiercely as the one in his heart. Keisha touched his arm, her eyes softer now. She's strong, she said. She'll fight. James nodded, praying to time itself, the time he'd wasted, the time he now begged for. Their daughter's life, Amara's life, hung in the balance, and all he could do was wait. The neonatal intensive care unit at Mercy Hospital hummed with the quiet rhythm of monitors, each beep a testament to tiny lives fighting to grow. Amara Johnson sat in a rocking chair beside an incubator, her eyes fixed on her daughter, Zoe, born 6 weeks premature during the storm that had nearly claimed them both. Barely 4 pounds, Zoe lay swaddled in a pale yellow blanket, her tiny chest rising with determined breaths. Tubes and wires monitored her vitals, but her grip on Amara's finger, which slipped through the incubator's port, was fierce. James Whitaker stood nearby, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up as he watched mother and child. The crisis had passed, but the fragility of this moment held them both in its grip. Amara's recovery had been slow, the preeclampsia leaving her weak but resolute. She'd spent the past week in the hospital, moving between her room and the NICU, her strength returning with each visit to Zoe. James hadn't left her side, sleeping in a hospital chair, canceling board meetings despite the Thompson deal's collapse. His phone buzzed. Sarah, his assistant, was warning of a plummeting stock price and boardroom pressure to step down as CEO. He silenced it, focusing on Amara's soft humming, a jazz melody she used to sing in their old brownstone. "She's stronger every day," Amara said, her voice soft but steady, like my grandmother's. James nodded, his throat tight. They'd named Zoe after Amara's grandmother, who raised 3 children alone while working 2 jobs. The name felt like a promise, a tether to resilience. "She's got your fight," he said, his hand hovering near the incubator, hesitant to intrude. Amara looked at him, her eyes searching. "I was scared, James. Not just about Zoe, but about us, about trusting you again. The world you come from has never been kind to me or her." Her voice wavered, hinting at the judgment she'd faced as a single mother. The whispers about their daughter's future in a society quick to judge. People will look at her, at us, and see differences. I don't want her to feel less because of it. James knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "I know I failed you before. I let my world, my mother, my ambition, pull me away. But I'm here now, and I'll protect her. I'll protect you both." His voice cracked, the weight of his past choices heavy. He'd learned from a social worker that Amara's job loss at Anderson Advertising wasn't just personal. It reflected a broader pattern of pregnant women, especially those from marginalized communities, being pushed out of corporate spaces. The knowledge fueled his resolve to do more than offer money. Keisha entered the NICU, her steps quieter than her usual fire. She'd stayed in Chicago, moving into James's guest house to support Amara. Her distrust of him had softened since the storm, her focus now on Zoe. "She's got your nose," Keisha said, peering at the baby, her voice warm. She glanced at James, her eyes less hostile. "Amara told me you've been here every day. Didn't expect that." "I'm trying," James said, meeting her gaze. "I know I have a lot to make up for." Keisha nodded, her lips tight. "You do. But you showed up when it counted. That's a start." Her words were a small bridge, one James hoped to cross. The NICU door opened, and Margaret Whitaker stepped in, her usual polish softened by a hand-knitted blanket draped over her arm. Amara tensed, her hand tightening on Zoe's. Margaret's visit to the mansion had triggered Amara's latest health scare, her prejudice, a sharp wound. But now, Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed, her posture uncertain. "I brought this for Zoe," she said, holding out the blanket. I was wrong, Amara. About you, about everything. I saw you as an outsider, not as the woman my son loved. I'm sorry. Amara studied her, her guard up but softening at the sincerity in Margaret's voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But it's not just about me. It's about Zoe, about the world she'll face. Can you accept her, all of her?" Margaret nodded, tears welling. "I want to. I want to be better. For her, for you both." Keisha raised an eyebrow, skeptical but silent, giving Margaret space to prove herself. James's phone buzzed again, a call from the board chair. He stepped into the hall, answering reluctantly. "Whitaker, your absence is tanking us," the chair barked. "Stocks down 15%. Step up or step down." James took a breath, Zoe's tiny face in his mind. "I'm stepping down," he said. "Family comes first." He hung up, the decision freeing despite the cost. Millions in losses, a tarnished legacy. He returned to the NICU, finding Amara watching him. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "That was big, James. Bigger than I expected." "It's nothing compared to this," he said, gesturing to Zoe. "I love you, Amara. I never stopped, even when I was too blind to see it. I'm here for you, for her, no matter what." Amara's eyes glistened. "I love you too, but love doesn't erase the past. It's a start, not a fix." Her words were honest, a challenge to keep proving himself. The heirloom clock's chime, a memory from their shared past, echoed in his mind, a reminder that rebuilding trust took time. The late afternoon sun bathed James Whitaker's Gold Coast mansion in a golden glow, its rays filtering through the living room's tall windows. 6 weeks after the storm that brought Zoe into the world, the house no longer felt like a sterile monument to success. Photos of Amara's pregnancy journey and Zoe's early days in the NICU adorned the once bare walls, their frames a mix of wood and silver, chosen by Amara. The heirloom clock, a wedding gift restored from storage, ticked steadily in the corner, its chime a gentle heartbeat for their new life. Today, Zoe was coming home. Amara sat on the couch, cradling Zoe, now a sturdy 5 pounds, in a pale yellow onesie knitted by Margaret Whitaker. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Amara's, her eyes, Amara's eyes, blinking up with quiet curiosity. James sat beside them, his arm resting lightly around Amara's shoulders, his gaze fixed on their daughter. Dr. Lisa Patel had signed Zoe's discharge papers that morning, praising her strength. "She's a fighter," the doctor had said, smiling like her mother. Amara's recovery from preeclampsia had been steady, her resilience a quiet force that anchored them all. Keisha bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of sandwiches and lemonade, her usual fire softened by a grin. She'd extended her stay, moving into the guest house to help Amara navigate motherhood. "Look at my niece," she said, setting the tray down and stealing the show. Her eyes met James's, the wariness from weeks ago replaced by cautious respect. His unwavering presence in the NICU, his resignation as CEO to prioritize family, had chipped away at her distrust. "You did well getting that car seat installed," she added, a rare nod to his efforts. Margaret entered, her steps tentative, a basket of hand-knitted blankets in her arms. Her apology in the NICU had marked a turning point. Her prejudice gave way to a desire to connect with Zoe. She said she would be offering the basket to Amara for the nursery. "I hope they're okay." Amara nodded, her smile guarded but genuine. "They're beautiful, Margaret. Thank you." The older woman's eyes glistened, her journey from judgment to acceptance a quiet victory. The front door opened, and Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, ushered in a delivery of flowers from Mike, the pilot who'd braved the storm to save Amara and Zoe. A note read, "Welcome home, little one." The living room, once a cold space for business meetings, now brimmed with warmth. Welcome home banners strung by Keisha, a small cake baked by Mrs. Chen, and photos capturing Zoe's milestones. James had canceled his country club membership, trading networking for moments like this. The board's pressure and the stock's 15% drop had cost him millions, but the loss felt like freedom. Amara leaned against James, Zoe stirring in her arms. She said I got something for her, pulling a silver frame from a bag. Inside was a photo from the NICU. Amara holding Zoe, James beside them. Keisha and Margaret on either side, smiling. Not the polished grins of his old world, but absolute, hard-won joy. For the clock table, she said, so she knows where she came from. James's throat tightened. It's perfect, he said, his voice low. The clock chimed 3, its sound weaving through their quiet celebration. Amara looked at Zoe, her voice soft. Listen, sweet girl. That clock saw your mommy and daddy fall in love, fall apart, and find their way back. Now it'll watch you grow. Keisha sat beside them, her eyes soft. You're gonna have a hell of a story, Zoe. She glanced at James. Your dad's trying. That's something. He's more than trying, Amara said, her hand finding James's. But it's not easy. People will talk about us, about her. She nodded at Zoe, her voice hinting at the societal whispers they'd face, the judgments about their unconventional family. James had learned from a social worker that Amara's struggles, losing her job, scraping by, reflected systemic barriers, ones he'd been blind to. He'd started reading about workplace discrimination, vowing to use his influence to advocate for change. James said, "We'll face it together," his arm tightening around her. I'm not the man I was. I'm here, day by day, for both of you. Margaret spoke, her voice hesitant. I wasn't fair to you, Amara. I let my world's rules blind me. But Zoe, she's shown me what matters. If you let me, I'd like to be part of her life. Amara nodded, a tear escaping. Day by day, she echoed, her smile small but real. Outside, the sun dipped, painting the sky in shades of pink. Inside, the clock ticked on, marking not just time, but a family rebuilt, bound by choice, love, and forgiveness, not by the expectations James had once chased. Zoe stirred, her tiny hand gripping Amara's finger, and James knew this was his true legacy. Not buildings or deals, but the warmth of this moment, the promise of a future forged together.